Bueno, ¿quieres aprender cómo hablar español, cierto? Listo. As we speak, it is basically 12 on the dot, and I actually have my second to last Spanish class before I leave Colombia. So, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, I will finish this video. Hola mis amores, me llamo Tahirah y bienvenidos a mi YouTube canal. En este video quiero explicar cómo aprendí español solo a mí mismo en casi 2 años y Spanish is so humbling. En este video quiero explicar cómo llegué al nivel intermedio en mi español y todos mis tips con practicar español o cualquier idioma que estás aprendiendo. También quiero mostrarte mi proceso de aprender español. Se cambió ahora porque estoy en Medellin. Yo vivo en Medellin. Estoy en clases con una profe. Y es muy diferente. Es muy diferente ahora que antes. So we're gonna talk about all of that. I'm gonna try not to cringe at my own Spanish because it's definitely a process and I've never spoke this much Spanish in a YouTube video ever. Bismillah. Si tú quieres aprender más y a ver cómo lo hizo, sigue visto. Before we really get into it, I want to answer some frequently asked questions that people always ask me and that you guys are probably going to ask me or are wondering as well, which will provide some context into my Spanish learning journey. Listo, vamos. Primero, my ethnicity. I am African American and Afro-Caribbean. I didn't grow up hearing Spanish in my family, in my household. I do have the occasional Puerto Rican cousin. As do most Black people. I feel like that's very common. No? Okay. I am from New York, though. Southside Jamaica, Queens, and it's crazy. Born and raised, my entire family on both sides are from New York. So I did grow up hearing Spanish and like learning Spanish in school. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing with like Muslim kids that go to madrasa and like they learn Arabic in school, but they don't know nothing about Arabic. Very, very similar. To pat my back, I've always been good at Spanish. Like I don't ever remember getting anything less than an A in my entire life. New York has a lot of people that speak Spanish from literally all over the Latino diaspora. The two most common that I can think about is Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. But also being from Queens, Queens has a lot. Oh, I just realized I don't have my earrings in. Do I need to go put the... Hold on. Mucho mejor, sí o no? I was saying that in Queens specifically, there are a lot of like Ecuadorians, Colombians, Venezuelans. Literally, depending on like which stop of the train, specifically on like the 7 train, you'll hit a different community of Latinos. Question number 3 is probably going to be why did I decide to learn Spanish? If you want to hear me talk more in detail about my Spanish journey and how I ended up moving to Colombia, I'm going to link that video up here and down below. I literally did an hour-long get ready with me Q&A video all about that. But to sum it up really quick, so I chose Spanish because, like I said before, I've always done well in Spanish in school. It is a language that I've always loved hearing and listening to. Spanish is also the second most spoken language in the world. And so me siento como si aprende un nuevo idioma, necesito usarlo en mi vida real, ¿sabes? So I felt like Spanish being so widely spoken and me being from a place where there are so many people that speak Spanish, I know I'm going to be able to, inshallah, keep up with the language. Another reason Latinos are, in America at least, are the fastest growing ethnicity that is converting to Islam. And there's so much rich history between like the Spanish world and Islam and like the Moors and all of that. And it's something that I'm so fascinated by. And I plan on studying and writing books on this. And so learning Spanish is like step 1, but also I'm hoping to connect to this fast growing community in a certain type of way. I love the way Spanish sounds. Spanish to me has always been like the most romantic language. Like when I hear French, I'm like, girl, don't nobody want to hear that. Voulez-vous avec moi? No, for me, it's always gonna be español. It's always gonna be like the suave vente. It's always gonna be the yeah, corazón no tiene cara. Like it's always gonna give como la flor, tanto amor. Ay, como me duele. Ooh, it's always gonna be that para mí. And lastly, the reason I decided to learn a new language in general is because, like I said before, I'm African American. I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans who had their language, their culture stripped from them and were forced to speak English and had this whole new way of life put on them. Now, yes, Spanish is still a colonizer language. I actually strongly loathe Espanol from Spain. I hate it. However, the act of choosing to learn a new language, to choose a tongue, to decide in what manner you want to explain yourself or express yourself is so powerful as a descendant of enslaved Africans. So yeah, those are some of the reasons that I decided to learn Spanish. And the last question I'm going to answer really quick is learning on my own. Why did I learn on my own? Did I learn completely on my own? I literally woke up one day and was like, I'm going to teach myself Spanish. For context, I am a Capricorn and I'm a New Yorker. So there's not quite much when it comes to like confidence and like knowledge that I won't do. You can't convince me that I can't do anything. And I've also been on this journey of like self-teaching because I am not in school at the moment and I love learning. I'm a nerd. I've been, learning a lot from different courses online and like video essays and I've been increasing my Islamic studies. And so I just told myself, like, why do you think you can't teach yourself Spanish? And that was the start of that. So yeah, I've literally been teaching myself Spanish completely. I have never went to a school. I didn't study Spanish in college. So yeah, 2 years of me just like thugging it out on my own. That's a perfect transition because it's time to get into the tips. Let's get into how I managed to get to an intermediate level. Step number 1 to learning Spanish, or I would say learning any language. I think this could be really helpful if you're also learning like Latin languages and if you're coming from English. Pick an accent, pick a culture, pick a country, pick a region. This is going to be really helpful because there are so many different ways that people speak. The language is the people are the culture is the language. It's all intertwined. And I just constantly think about the way that, for example, African Americans speak English. African American vernacular English is damn near a language. And even though I do tend to naturally code switch depending on the circumstance, if I was home or like on the phone with my friends, I would talk very differently than I talk right now. And my New York accent would be a lot heavier. I would be using different words, like the lingo, the verbiage, like todo would change. And so it's the same thing in other languages. So if you really want to do your best to learn Spanish, step 1 is to know that they are not the same. So like I was saying before, we're African American vernacular English. Everywhere that there are Black people, we speak a language very differently. You think about in West Africa, how like West Africans that speak French, how they speak French. You could think about in Louisiana or in Haiti in regards to like Creole. You could think about in Dominican Republic, how they speak Spanish, or even all along the Caribbean coast. And I love that. Being able to pick an accent, pick a culture, to pick a country or a region makes it even easier to kind of really dive into it and to learn. The way that people pronounce things, the phrases that they use, the words that they use instead of other words, all come from like cultural content, comes from like movies and TV shows. You know what I mean? El acento que elegí fue Colombian. But what has been so interesting, y'all, oh my gosh. Inicialmente quería hablar como un paisa porque me encanta el paisa de acento. A mí es muy musical. Tiene mucho ritmo, es muy similar a la forma que la gente desde Trinidad y Tobago hablar.
Claro que sí, yo soy de Medellín y ese acento, yo creo, pues ahí lo estoy exagerando un poquito. Pero sí, para mí estoy de acuerdo, que es como muy, puede ser sensual, pero puede ser también como tranquilizante, como que hay un ritmo, es chévere, a mí me gusta.
Yeah, so I go leave my house about 3 o'clock in the morning and I go take my grab all and sing, cause girl, you know me and flying. And I should land about 1 o'clock and sing now. Don't come later.
Very sing-song like. Well, honestly, I would say before I chose the Paisa accent, I chose Colombia as a country. And the main reason is because Colombia has such rich black history, I should say. That's like one of the most important things for me, to feel comfortable and to know that from whatever region or culture that I'm learning, that Black people have a presence there, that Black people are acknowledged or heard, X, Y, and Z. Obviously, in Colombia, there are so many different ways that people speak Spanish. There was a YouTube video I watched that kind of broke down the different accents of Colombians, and if I find it, I will link it. In addition to picking accent in a culture, I would say part 2 is to immerse yourself. People always say to immerse yourself, but what I mean, specifically as somebody who has taught themselves, and I'm assuming you're probably teaching yourself, is you need to immerse yourself in a way that's so personal. You need to listen to Spanish as much as possible. Even if it's something as simple as like your Alexa, your Siri. I know a lot of people, they change their settings on their phone when they start learning a language. Girl, I'm not there yet. I was watching Kiana Naomi's videos from before she went to Colombia. She was doing like a morning routine, and I think the app was Headspace. And so she was listening to meditation, but it was in Spanish. So little things like that to just get your brain used to hearing the language. I was also in a very weird time in my life when I was learning Spanish because I wasn't going outside much. So unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of real life interactions. But if there's one thing I would do over, I would say don't only immerse yourself like right around you in regards to like your phone, your computer, your home. Immerse yourself in the culture. Go outside. Go meet the people. Go to restaurants where the country or accent you have chosen, speak to the people there in Spanish, or tell them that you're learning Spanish. Ask for advice. Go to places in your city where there are a large Latino community, because I'm sure that there is one, especially if you're here in the US. This is also really helpful because by forming a connection and really immersing yourself the best that you can, you're able to learn just so much faster. Another way that you can immerse yourself that I don't know if people talk about a lot is like following people on social media that speak Spanish. It's so weird. Now that I'm in Colombia, I get recommended all of these amazing YouTube channels. And these are people who have hundreds of thousands to millions of followers. And I would have never seen them because being in the US, they would have never recommended me their channel. And unfortunately, I feel like I'm going to lose all of these people when I go back home. Following people on TikTok, following people on Instagram, following people on YouTube who speak Spanish is so helpful to just learn how the people actually speak. My friend Eileen has a TikTok page dedicated to sharing more about Afro-Latino culture, specifically Afro-Colombian culture. Oh, girl, she is also Muslim Muslim, and alhamdulillah, I'm so happy that we got to meet while I was here in Colombia. Watching her videos talking about the history of Afro-Colombian music, talking about prominent Afro-Colombian artists, Afro-Colombian activists, Afro-Colombian bands, Afro-Colombian food, festivals. All of this was so helpful for me in learning the language. And I will say, it is going to feel weird to be quote unquote mimicking or imitating these people's accents. But to be honest, that's just what it is. Like, you learn from imitation. You have to remove all of the ego. It really strips you down to like childhood because you're gonna sound dumb. You're gonna sound dumb. And it's okay, girl. It's okay. So remove that ego, that pressure, the perfectionism. Just throw it in the bag. Take it all away, because the only way you're gonna learn is if you allow yourself to be vulnerable and be present in your mistakes and to just speak. But I personally felt really weird with the whole imitation thing, especially being here in Colombia, and like the Paisas, they have such a distinct accent. I'm sure Colombians hear stuff about their accent all the time. I didn't want it to be like, oh, you making fun of me? If they talking to me and I'm like, boy, sorry, marica, sorry, mano, chimba, parce. I didn't want nobody to feel no type of way. Literally the only way you learn, think about kids, like they literally repeat after you. It's imitation, it's imitation, it's imitation. Latinos are so nice. Oh my gosh, they are so much nicer than people from the US. When immigrants come to the US and they're trying to learn English, most Americans, most white people are so rude, so mean, so just so ignorant about it. But here, and even when I was back home, that the Latino people I told that I was learning Spanish have been so sweet. I remember I was in an Uber, and the Uber driver, he was Dominican and he was from New York. So we were talking and I was telling him, I'm trying to learn Spanish. And so immediately he starts speaking Spanish. I'm not prepared. And at that point, I was so shy with speaking. I'm still kind of shy with speaking. He was speaking in Spanish the entire Uber ride, and I was speaking in English. He was just so sweet. Even when I got here, people will hear me speak, ask for directions, whatever, and they're immediately like, oh my gosh, your Spanish is so good. Like, Latino people are so sweet. And so it just made it that much more inviting to learn the language, knowing that the people are going to be receptive. My Afro-Colombian and Afro-Latino friends don't mind if I imitate them, because to them it doesn't feel like imitation. You have to remember that it feels weird because you're coming from outside, but to them this is how they speak. As a New Yorker who also has a distinct accent, if I'm in New York and I'm talking to somebody and they talk like me, I'm like, okay, so you're from New York. Like, that's just what it is. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, you're trying to make fun of me, unless you're trying to make fun of me. Remember that you are a guest in a culture, so do not overstep. Do not be a colonizer in somebody else's culture, in their country. Don't do it. People always talk about watching Spanish shows or watching a show in another language and just using like English subtitles, which can be great if you're trying to improve your comprehension. However, it got to a point for me where my comprehension is pretty well because I spent a lot of time just listening. But I felt like before coming to Colombia, my speaking was severely lacking. So another tip tip I have in regards to subtitles, watch the shows and movies that you already watch in English with Spanish subtitles. Your primary language is English. Instead of having to like kind of process what's going on in your brain so aggressively via audio, being able to just read is, for me, was so much more helpful and kind of more natural way of learning, because like I already watch every show with subtitles, and so it was easy for me to like pick up on words, what words repeated themselves. Context clues are really big when you're learning a language. Watch the shows you already watch in English, but just put on Spanish subtitles and you'll be surprised by how much you pick up. One of my favorite aspects of Spanish is the music. Once again, you want to be intentional. You want to be proactive. What do they say in school? Like an active listener, active learner. So what I would do, let's just say a new Bad Bunny song, right? I would go to the song, and on Apple Music, I don't have Spotify. You click the little, what is it, like quotations at the bottom, and while the song is playing, the lyrics will show up. You also can click view full song lyrics. That was similar to what I would do with the subtitles. I would just become accustomed to like context clues. I would pick out which words did I know, which words were I familiar with, can I guess what this sentence means? And then I would go on Google and look up the English translation of the song and like compare and contrast. That was really helpful. Even though music, I feel like, is a universal language, it's nice to know what you're saying. Bro, imagine my shock when I was looking up the lyrics of Calladita by Bad Bunny. And I was like, bebida, marijuana, sexo. What? I mean, Calladita, when I think about the name, like Calle means like the street. So I'm like, Anyway, it was really, really helpful to be able to directly look at the Spanish and the English, the Spanish and the English. I think sometimes when people are learning a language, or some of the advice that I've heard, it's almost too much of a focus on the language you're trying to learn without correlating it back to the language you already know. Learning Spanish don't mean you don't speak English, even though I have forgotten certain words in English, which I love that for me. I would love to get to a point where I'm like, someone's asking me something and I'm speaking in English. I'm like, por ejemplo, no sé cómo explicarlo en inglés, pero en español nos decimos, like, you know what I mean? I would love that. I became a Cali Uchis fan because I was learning Spanish. I will not lie. She has a really cute Paisa accent, and it was really nice to hear her go back and forth between English and Spanish and English and Spanish. And I genuinely like her genre of music. I would literally sit there and like repeat and like think about how she says the words, what words does she pronounce or stress, which words does she not, how she flows back and forth between Spanish and English. Studying her has just been really, really helpful. Even in regards to recognizing how Paisa speaks, so that when I came to Colombia, I could now understand them, because I know, for example, like in Colombia, they don't say the D's a lot. To say I'm tired in Spanish is estoy cansado. Or for me, because I'm a girl, estoy cansada. But in Colombia, they would say estoy cansada. The D just falls. Similar to how in the Caribbean and like Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, they drop the S's. Como está? You know what I mean? So just picking up on the accent is also helpful to learning how to understand people when they're speaking. So remember I was talking before about how when I came to Colombia, my comprehension was really high and my accent was really good, but I was not comfortable with speaking. You got to get comfortable with speaking, babes. Like, you have to open your mouth. Me to Tahirah in the past. Amor, ¿qué pasó? You have to speak. Are you learning Spanish because you want to understand Spanish? Or are you learning Spanish because you want to speak Spanish? Porque si tú quieres hablar español, necesitas hablar. Abra tus labios. Abras tu boca. You have to speak. Even if that means you got to talk to your damn self. Remember I told y'all when I was learning Spanish, I was like bored in the house and I'm in the house bored. I wasn't talking to nobody. So I literally would talk to myself. Whether that means think out loud, which I often do anyway. I have ADHD, so I have to process a lot of stuff out loud. For example, I would be like, what do I want to eat? Before I would do that, I would tell myself, say it in Spanish. So I would force myself in that moment to be like, ¿Qué quiero comer? Do that word before you open your mouth. Say it in Spanish. That thought that you have, say it in Spanish. And so I guess that was really helpful for me because I do have intrusive and like impulsive thoughts. And so I've kind of been like training my brain, like the soundtrack that goes on in my mind all the time, to be in to be in Spanish. The ad libs, I'm trying to get them to be bilingual with me. Investing in my accent and just getting comfortable speaking Spanish to myself has been really helpful in regards to giving me confidence to ask for help. When you learn another language, it also changes the way you think. Learning Spanish has made me more intentional about when I speak English, and I feel like I'm more clear. I format my thoughts in a different type of way. It's just a really interesting thing, but if you know another language, you know what I'm talking about. It really changes the way your brain works, and it was a shock as somebody who's only spoken English to discover the ways that language can kind of warp your perception of things. Another way to get comfortable speaking is to find a buddy. This section of my video, I really want to dedicate it to the bilinguals. What's that app, Hello Talk? I've never been on it, but I know Hello Talk is an app that people can go on there and find locals who speak the language you're trying to learn, and I think they're trying to learn your language, and you can kind of just like talk to them. I also know some weird stories about men being creepy on there, but what's new? What's new? Hello Talk is a great option if you are shy like me and you want to get Spanish practice, but I was too shy to even do that. I remember I downloaded the app and deleted it multiple times. Having a friend who speaks the language, who speaks both languages, is really helpful. The Spanglish speakers, without y'all, I am nothing. Y'all really do it for me every time. I still feel more comfortable speaking Spanglish than I do speaking English because it just flows so naturally, like to be able to like go from Spanish to English to English to Spanish. And if I don't know how to say this in Spanish, I can start speaking in English and you understand. Or if you don't really know how to explain something in English, you can say it in Spanish and I'm finna understand. I love it. Finding somebody who speaks the language you speak and the language you want to learn is top tier. I came to Colombia in April for the first time. It was the last week of Ramadan, and I met some sisters at the masjid. And so when I came back home, I was still connected with these sisters, and we would have like these FaceTime calls on WhatsApp, and it was such an easy way for me to learn Spanish. There was one sister in particular, Jessica, amor de mi vida, and Jessica is learning English in college, and so it was really easy when we were there in Colombia for me to communicate with her. We weren't just communicating in English, we were literally speaking Spanglish. I was able to like speak Spanish as much as I could, and if I just ended up speaking English, she also understood, and it was like a lot of help. She really helped me with just feeling comfortable with learning and acknowledging that like people are not going to make fun of me, that I'm doing good, to objectively tell me what you need to work on and what you're doing great at outside of my own insecurities and worries has been so amazing. Another thing I did was I started slowly incorporating Spanish into more of my videos and content for practice, because even right now I'm talking to myself, I'm talking to a camera, and that was an extension of me thinking out loud, ad-libbing, was bringing up the little bit of Spanish in my videos. So I would start my videos now, it's like hola mis amores, or dropping a pero, dropping a obvio, dropping me encanta, stuff like that, to just get used to speaking, to feeling normal, to feeling natural, to not feeling weird with the language. The number one reason, la mayoría, this is the heavy hitter. Literally, the only reason I was able to learn Spanish is because of language transfer. Language transfer is an app / program / method / YouTube channel. I discovered language transfer because I was watching this content creator, I think his name is Ikena, and he does language learning content, and he made a video about ranking apps to learn another language. Duolingo is always going to be at the bottom. I don't know what to tell you. Duolingo is always going to be at the bottom, babes. And so he was like, number 2 was language transfer, and I was like, interesting. So I'm on my Zoom, I'm on my Googles, and I find out that it's a YouTube channel. I go to the YouTube channel and I listen to the creator do an interview
for NGOs and stuff, and somewhere in that journey I kind of realised, okay, actually what I'm doing in the languages can be an activism if I make it free.
Why did you decide to make everything free?
I think what most affected me was that experience of kind of reconstructing yourself in a new language and realising how much of yourself is just a result of your language and maybe not chosen, be it, how your language shapes the way in which you think, because in the thinking method we're dealing a lot with thought, and like that thought we're transcribing into languages. I mean, there was just a lot of facets in there that made me think like, actually, this can be my activism.
What I loved about language transfer before I even started was the creator is like an activist, and so his belief is that language is a tool to connect the world. It's a way that we can understand each other, to learn from each other, to help each other in our oppression and our struggles, to connect to each other, to fight the powers that be. And so that's why he made it free. And that's why it's easily accessible. And the idea of language transfer is that we all have more in common than we think. And so the method works by teaching you the words in Spanish that are so similar to things in English. Por ejemplo, with the words that end with shun, Tion, he teaches you that those words are usually going to turn into sion. Education, educación. Information, información. And so he breaks down these connections, what he calls positive language transfer. And it makes you feel so confident with your language learning abilities because you're not starting by what you don't know. You're starting by what already feels familiar. And this is kind of what I was talking about before, the connection between the two languages, and finding that bridge is going to be the most helpful thing. Watching your English shows with Spanish subtitles, speaking Spanglish with your friends, and learning and acknowledging the ways that Spanish and English are so intertwined. It changed the game for me. And also the way that he formats the episodes, the videos, it's kind of podcast style. So if you're an auditory learner, this might be really amazing for you. And also he has a student that he's teaching. So he's not talking to you. He's talking to a student. You're able to pause to listen. The student makes mistakes. The student asks questions. That was really helpful as well. The third thing that was really helpful about language transfer is I would say that the creator is kind of nerdy. He drops some etymology, the study of language. He drops some etymology in there. And his whole purpose is not to get you to memorize a language, but to know a language. And when he talks about the root of a word or what the literal translation of a word is or where it comes from or how it's changed, it makes it so that when you're trying to speak, you have branches to reach to for the word versus, okay, I wrote down pesadilla is nightmare, but instead, no, he's going to explain to you why pesadilla is nightmare and the root behind it or a funny story related to it or how it's related to other words. Language transfer was the perfect amalgamation of all of the things that I need to learn. Number one, the independence, the ability to go at my own flow, my own pace. Two, the ability to observe. I am the type of person where I need to stand back and watch before I intend to try. And so I got the ability to observe. I was able to be a nerd. I always have more questions. I always want to know more. And so I love that with language transfer, he gave us more. My one complaint kind of about language transfer is he emphasizes don't write, don't take notes. Girl, let me tell you a little something. You think I wasn't taking notes? You think I'm about to sit here and learn all of this and girl, I have ADHD, and even if I didn't, you think I'm gonna remember? No es posible. No, lo siento, no es posible, amor. I needed to take notes. I needed to be able to structure everything out the way my brain naturally wanted to structure it. I have certain categories where I have synonyms, I have opposites. I had things that were in a group. So for example, words like lejos, just far, cerca, close, alrededor, around, al lado, aside, esquina, corner. Then I had directions. I had derecho, izquierda, left and right. Verbs that were similar. I use Notion for everything. Notion is how I organize all of my thoughts. I am able to put things into, I think this is table view or board view, and highlight it. I can color code it. And then even if I look into my Spanish notes, I can put tables in there. I can italicize stuff. You can add links. You can add photos. You can add other graphs and stuff that you get from your teachers or online. Anki I used a little bit, but I couldn't commit to putting all those words in there as vocab. If you study at all, then you know what Anki is. If you don't, it is an app where you can make flashcards. I was able to really break it down in the way that I needed to fully remember. But I think what he meant by don't take notes is be present in the learning experience, which is good advice. And I think he was also saying don't rely heavy on notes as a means to memorize. Like I was saying before, he's not about the memorizing thing. He wants you to learn. But para mí, la única manera puedo aprender es si yo puedo escribir y organizar todos mis, what's stocks in Spanish? Future Tahirah put on screen. Yeah, I would say that's my only complaint about language transfer. I love that it was podcast style because I was able to use it so frequently. It was nice to be able to learn and not have to sit at a desk. So I would literally be listening to this while I was doing chores, washing clothes, and I would go on my daily hot girl walks in the fall so I would not get seasonal depression. Highly recommend. I would listen to it when I was cooking. I would go back and then try to take notes of everything I remembered. And every time I was ready to start a new lesson, I would go back and play the lesson from before. I wouldn't say that I had a schedule when I listened to it, but I was still consistent with it. So as we speak, I actually am only on lesson 65. It's been so long since I was on the app. It's been 3 months. Hello, because I've been learning here. But there's 90 Spanish lessons and I got to 65 and I was still considered intermediate. So now that I've done my 3 months here, I'm still going to be doing Spanish classes, inshallah, online. But while I've been here in Medellin, I've been doing all the past tense, the present tense, and we just finished future tense. That, plus I'm going to go back and finish the other, 22, 25 lessons that I have left. I don't know. I'm going to be unstoppable. I'm feeling Puerto Rican.
I felt like a Spanish, like a Puerto Rican in this hair. Y'all know I love me some Puerto Rican. I felt Puerto Rican in this. Rican!
I'm gonna also list some other channels that I really like that were helpful with me learning Spanish. Bilingual Vlogs is by a Afro-Latino, which I love. He has a few videos where he was in Medellin and he was asking people about Colombian like Paisa slang, which was really helpful. I think the other girl who is Colombian learned Spanish with Maria. She speaks only in Spanish, which when I first became introduced to Spanish learning content only in Spanish, I had to level up. I know I was talking earlier before about the beauty of being able to kind of learn in a bilingual space, but there becomes a time in a young learner's life where you need to advance, level up, you know what I mean? Spanish only content really kind of prepared me for when I walked into my first Spanish class. After maybe week 1, my Spanish teacher, and even I have a new teacher now, they do not speak to me in English. Not at all. There's another channel, I forgot what it's called, Spring Spanish. They teach you Spanish in frases, which is also really helpful for conversationally learning how native Spanish speakers group words together, the things that they use, the tone, the context is really, really helpful. All of that I'll link down below. Now let's just get into some general tips, okay? And these are tips that I may or may not have used, and these are also tips that like my teachers have given me, that people have told me, things that I wish I did. Todos. 1, read a book you already know in Spanish. This could be anything from the Bible. I'm currently reading the Quran in Spanish, which I got from one of the masjids here in Colombia, which I love. Or Twilight, Harry Potter. No importa, no importa. By reading a book you already know, the context and the nuances are already familiar to you. So that way, you're not lost when you're reading. You're starting with what you already know. Same thing with language transfer. You see the commonality. You're starting with what you already know, what already feels familiar for you, and then you're able to broaden your horizon from that point versus starting with what you don't know. My teacher told me that she doesn't like people that are learning Spanish to read children's books because then you are limiting your vocabulary. You are only going to know how to speak like a child. She said if you really want to just get accustomed to reading in Spanish, another great place to start in addition to books are newspapers, noticias, or even articles. They have like sophisticated language. They're talking about the world. There's so many different parts, especially like magazines, blogs, articles. They have stuff obviously about like music, about cooking, about culture, about politics, about whatever. So you're able to learn a lot. You want to be intentional. You want to be an active reader. So highlight words that you don't know or phrases or things that are always accompanied together. The hardest thing probably for me with learning Spanish is sentence structure and phrases. Because, por ejemplo, en español no dicen, I'm afraid. Ellos dicen, tengo miedo. They don't say, I'm hungry. They say, tengo hambre. Or even little stuff like me gusta, reflexive verbs we don't go together bad. So phrases for me is really, really difficult for me to kind of put together. And I think there gets to a point in your language learning journey where you have to stop thinking like your original language and think in the language you're trying to learn. Also on the internet, oh my gosh, Spanish text shortcuts and internet shortcuts. I was ordering something on Rappi. Rappi is like their Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever. And my deliverer sent me a message and it was like, oh, me regala, which is another one that means like, can I have or can you give me? Me regala el código porfa. The porfa or por favor was spelled with the X and then favor or fa. I forgot which one she said. And I was like, ooh. And I remember I got to class and we were learning the 30,000 billion trillion different ways you can use por y para. And my teacher was telling me that you can use por to mean multiplication. So like 5 by 5. And they use the X. So she was literally saying por favor or por qué. They would literally sometimes put a K, like the letter. Just other little stuff that you learn from just observing. Like, you gotta be nosy. You gotta be in a business. You can't learn unless you're in a business, but be a nice enough person that people feel like they can invite you into their business, okay? Google Translate. And let's talk about how I use Google Translate. It's really weird to me how people come to different countries and don't at least put what they want to say in English and then translate it into Spanish and then try to say it. Google Translate is your friend. Do not be embarrassed. Like I said, put the ego to the side. What I will do is if I have something that I want to say, instead of just writing it down in English and then translating it into Spanish and then saying it, I will type what I want to say in Spanish and just try. Like I tell myself, Tahirah, think about what you want to say, write it in Google Translate and see what Google tells you. And then I put what I want to say in English and then translate to Spanish and I compare what I got wrong, what was correct. In Spanish, they love having a little que on everything, or de, or lo de, lo que. They be adding lo que, de, a, just everywhere. Some of that is usually missing. Some of my formatting is usually incorrect. things like that. But it's been really helpful because A, I get the confidence boost of, oh, I know a little something, but B, I'm also training my brain to think in Spanish first. And that's a learning experience that you can do kind of every day on the go, in the move. Even as you're learning, like I said before, thinking out loud to yourself, I would literally just type it in Google Translate. Am I wrong? Am I right? Google Translate is in Spaniard Spanish. Unfortunately, you can't change it. And I get really annoyed, and I always remember when they start talking about vosotros and ice, and they start talking about some lo echo menos, which is how they say I miss you. So just be mindful of that. If you want to see more examples of what that looks like in practice, go watch my Colombia diaries, my Colombia vlog series. A lot of those are probably out by now. I feel like immersion as a blanket term is not helpful. That's why I tried in this video to give you guys examples of how you can immerse yourself in so many different ways. Immerse yourself virtually, in real life, immerse yourself in regards to the media you consume, whatever. But a lot of people would just be like, oh, go move somewhere. Girl, let me tell you something. I know people who are here in Colombia and they are not in Spanish classes. They talk about how hard it is for them to learn because, yes, they are hearing Spanish, they pick up on Spanish slang, they make friends with the locals, right? But without the structure of knowing what you're saying, they be mad confused. And so I think about like slang, and you can consider it broken. In order to break something, you gotta know how it works. You can't make the cool stylistic choices in how you speak if you don't know what you're supposed to actually be saying. You know what I mean? The ability to be in class with my teacher, my professor, is not going to let me sit there and make mistakes and sound dumb.
Pronuncias muy bien las vocales.
Gracias.
No las confundes con la pronunciación del inglés, por ejemplo. Y eso ya te da mucha más fluidez y obviamente se entiende mucho mejor lo que tú dices. Los tips, los consejos que puedes dar a las otras personas, yo espero que sí los
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Te ayudaron muchísimo, lo haces muy bien.
She's going to correct me. We're going to break it down. And I've been taking one-on-one classes. I don't know if I mentioned that. I'm not doing group because I need my time. If I have a question about something, she sees me struggling, she will literally we'll start going over it right then and there. Having that structure plus the freestyle, flowy, fun nature of having friends who speak Spanish has been the best thing for me to learn the language. And I think it's the most similar to how you grow up. You hear a language at home, around your friends, colloquially, right? And then you go to school and they teach you how to really put some stuff together. So yeah, it's just been really great to have both. And I definitely recommend, if you have the ability to immerse yourself by going to a different country to study the language, do it. If you have the ability to immerse yourself in your hometown with people that speak the language, do it. However, if you do not have the structure of a class or someone you can ask for questions, ask for advice, I think you're going to struggle a lot more than you have to. You can still learn the language, because another thing I was going to say about being here is you realize your brain is dependent on you to learn this language, because if not, you can't communicate. You can't order groceries. You can't get a taxi. You can't express any of your needs if you don't know how to say them. So there is a natural inclination to learn this language, which is helpful, but I just think you're going to struggle more. The ability to learn one-on-one with just me and my professor has been so healing to my inner child in ways that I did not expect. I unfortunately have a lot of trauma with school, just growing up and being a highly opinionated, but also highly intelligent, but also highly stubborn young Black Muslim girl. And it sucks because I love school so much. I'm not gonna lie to you, these 2-3 years that I've been out of school, I've been questioning, am I really as smart as I always thought I was or knew I was? And being back in this private, intimate setting has just healed so much of that. And I never was able to do one-on-one tutoring or one-on-one specialty classes. You don't really get those things when you go to public school. But the ability to address all of my concerns, to ask questions, to feel like I'm being heard, to have somebody whose sole focus is to make sure I know and I understand. Literally, after everything we go through, after every text that we read, my teacher asks me, are there any words you don't understand? Anything you want me to explain? Any doubts? Any questions? If I want to talk about something we learned a month ago, she'll start writing it on the board. That attention and commitment to my learning has, I don't know, it's just, Yeah. And the constant affirmation, my God. I knew I was a words of affirmation girly, but I didn't realize just how mean teachers have been to me my entire life until I met these teachers and they were nice to me. And even some of my Afro-Colombian friends, they'll walk around and be like, oh my gosh, Tahirah taught herself Spanish on her own. Tahirah's Spanish is so good. My teacher told me today I speak Spanish better than all her other students. Ya lo sé. Anyway, I needed that. Affirmation is always a beautiful thing. And even though I've done the work of affirming myself, it's nice to have people affirm what I already know and remind me of the things that I forgot. And I think I truly forgot that I was smart. I really now understand the value in seriously learning another language. It's been amazing to have something I'm excited about like this, to be excited about learning again. Alhamdulillah, I'm so blessed. Last thing I want to talk about though is, yes, I said I wanted to have a Paisa accent. Pero ahora lo que yo sé mejor. And I have unfortunately witnessed how racism works here, specifically towards Afro-Colombianos. I no longer necessarily desire to have a Paisa accent. I don't actually think I'm super aligned with Paisas. I'm more aligned culturally, ethically with Afro-Colombianos. No shocker there. I was asking my friend who speaks English, I was like, okay, so what does my accent give to you? And he was like, you sound so Caribbean when you speak Spanish. But it's interesting because it's a different type of Caribbean, because parts of Colombia is El Pacífico y el Caribe. And I just love that. It means so much more to me. He was like, oh, you're from Buenaventura. So somebody to tell me that I speak Spanish like black people. No tengo oído nada más. I don't think I've done a good job necessarily of showing my accent right now, because I know it doesn't flow as naturally as when I'm in conversations with Afro-Colombians. I'm really trying my best, so the accent is a bit more apparent. All of my identities felt so seen here with the Afro-Colombian community. And so yo prefiero hablar con ellos más que otras personas o otra parte de Colombia, porque Afro-Colombianos son mi gente. And I'm just so blessed, so happy to have had such a black ass experience here. And that means everything to me. And I'm so blessed. And I know that not everybody has the opportunity to do this. And I know that Afro-Colombians and Colombia in general struggle so much under Western imperialism, colonialism, with the gentrification, with the negative impacts of tourism. And I just pray that I have been a help to the people here. I pray that I do the language and the culture justice. I pray that the way that the people have moved me, the way that this language has empowered me, that I have done just a smidge of the same. Amin. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos por visto mi video. Y ojalá que te aprendes algo. Ojalá que este video puede ayudarte mucho. I'm really excited to continue my Spanish learning journey. I am excited to hopefully know it enough to teach it to my kids. I really just feel like everybody needs to know at least more than one language. This journey of learning Spanish, I didn't realize it when I started, but it is so entrenched with other things that I know are part of my purpose in such a beautiful way. I just love that I can kind of speak Spanish now. And I hope for anybody that is on their language learning journey that this has been helpful, that this can teach you something, that this made sense. I hope that I can inspire you. Let me know if you want more language learning content. I do plan on moving to another Spanish speaking country, inshallah. And I do plan on minoring in Spanish when I go back to school, inshallah. Seeing Spanish stuff and hearing me speak Spanish is probably going to be something a bit more common on my channel. I hope the girls don't mind. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any more questions about learning Spanish, and I'll chat with y'all down below. Make sure you follow me everywhere on the internet at Sincerely Tahirah. Make sure you go watch my Colombia stuff to see me speak Spanish in real time. And I'll see you in my next one. Nos vemos pronto. Más tarde. Ciao.